this screening, I just lost my train of thought because I was like, God, this theater is full and it's Tuesday at 2:30, and does anybody work? I can't believe how big it is and how full it is on Tuesday at 2:30, but that is what is amazing about the Toronto Film Festival, and when Cameron and I are talking about this backstage, it's just full of movie lovers, and it's not always the case at festivals, it's not always the case when you show a movie, but really, you feel the enthusiasm from the crowds here in Toronto. I've always wanted to show a movie here, so we're very excited. We're going to do a thing after, we're going to do a Q&A we were just talking about, so if you want to stick around after, it'll be fun. And yeah, just enjoy the movie. It was a lot of work. The movie is a slow burn. Be patient and enjoy it. And we'll see you after the screening. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I wish Joaquin was here. He had to go home today, but he would love to be here. I know, but he's phenomenal in the movie. It's his movie, obviously, so I wish he was here.
So we've got a few minutes to just talk a little bit about the film, and you may need a moment. So we will take some audience questions, but I want to begin, Todd, by just asking you about creating this world. And the Joker's a character that most of us know in different incarnations. You've reinvented this in a certain way, and you've also created this incredible Gotham out of New York of 1981. Can you talk a little bit about that world that you've created here?
Yeah, I mean, it's really a take on the New York that I remember from growing up, and you know, there's a lot of great movies that essentially serve as time capsules. I remember with our production designer, Mark Friedberg, and costume designer, Mark Bridges, and even the picture car guys, and Larry, of course, the DP. We watched, did you ever see Chantal Ackerman's, was it Letters from Home? Yeah, which is this Belgian filmmaker in 1977. She did these amazing long takes in New York City in 1977. It's amazing in that it's essentially a time capsule. And we watch that, and you just see how the city looked back then, how the cars looked, how people dressed, and we noticed, you know, it wasn't as crowded as New York we know now. People weren't rushing as much. People sat on chairs outside the apartments because maybe they didn't have air conditioning or I don't know. And it was just a different pace, and you don't really, you see stuff like that, and it just helped inform us, you know. And of course, there's a ton of movies from that time, whether it was Dog Day Afternoon or Serpico or Taxi Driver, obviously, you know, and you look at those movies and it really helped us build that world. There's also, of course, some visual effects in the movie, even though it's not a CG comic book movie, there's plenty of visual effects, clean up things you do, taking out satellite dishes, removing certain cars, you know, that you can't get out of the shot for some reason, and just general world building of the city, so it's not New York, you know, changing the skyline, making it much more dense, and that kind of thing.
And I love that Chantal Ackerman is a reference point for Joker. That's fantastic.
She's an amazing filmmaker.
She is an amazing filmmaker. We're doing a retrospective, actually, at the Cinematheque, so that's good timing.
Yeah.
I want to ask you also, of course, that many great actors have played versions of this character over the years. Heath Ledger, Jack Nicholson, and so on. But I want to ask you about Joaquin Phoenix, casting him in particular for your version of the Joker. Why him?
I mean, a little bit for me, because if you know Joaquin, and you know his, Joaquin has, I jokingly say he's an agent of chaos. He has chaos in him. And, you know, you can act that, probably, but if you don't have to, there's something to that. So when we started writing this and conceiving of this, we always had Joaquin in mind. I didn't really know him at that time, but I would say that was obviously also he's a brilliant actor and he could do anything, but there's something about him, he has a spirit in him that there's a little chaos in him.
And then Robert De Niro, getting him, not just Robert De Niro, the actor, but the characters he's played in King of Comedy and in Taxi Driver, they're woven through your Joker as well.
Yeah. Well, clearly there's some King of Comedy in there, and when I sent Bob the script, you know, I said, you know, just know this is sort of inspired by, and it's a kind of flip on Rupert Pupkin where you're playing Jerry Langford now, and he dug that, but you know, he also didn't read too much into it. It was more a nod. It has no real connection in that way. He told me some great stories about Jerry Lewis on the set. It was actually thrilling. But yeah, so Bob read it and just really liked the script and understood what we were doing, and he came on board. So that was a thrill for me and Joaquin, because we just think he's the greatest of all time. So
All right, let's take some questions from you, and as I always ask, please bring your very best questions for Todd Phillips. Thank you. The question is, what kind of challenges do you face building a movie around a villain rather than a hero?
Well, that was what was interesting to us, and you know, we approached it, quite honestly, like we're doing an origin story of a villain, but the villain is the hero, and you root for him until you can't root for him any longer. And that point is different for certain people, but you definitely, you know, Arthur's actions in this movie are abhorrent by the end. You're not supposed to be rooting for him. And so there's this idea of like, what happens if the villain is a hero at the beginning? And then because of Joaquin's brilliant acting, I kind of describe it as like, you know, a volume knob from 0 to 11 for fun. And you know, he slowly is turning. It's not like somebody said to me, well, when does he, you know, turn into the Joker? It's like he goes into a phone booth and comes out as the Joker. It really, when you watch the movie again, if you ever do, you can really notice this kind of slow transformation that happens. And so yeah, the idea was to sort of do it almost as an origin story of a hero, but you know, where you're really rooting for him and you feel for him, and then there's a point, and it's different for everyone, where you're like, I'm out.
The question is about the scene where he's sitting in the back of the police car. Was that a nod to The Dark Knight?
I mean, honestly, it wasn't, but I could see why you make that reference, and it wasn't not out of disrespect. We love that movie. It wasn't a conscious thing, but I see the shot, and I know, I mean, in his, he was driving, it's the wildest shot. Yeah. No, I know, it's a good point. But it wasn't done intentionally like that, but thank you.
The question was it always the plan to include a moment of Batman's origin as well?
Yeah, it was. I mean, we just thought it's a fun little thing to plant that seed. To be clear, like, once we finally convinced Warner Brothers and DC to let us make the movie, they really had no rules for us. It was really kind of liberating, because Joker is, he's an unreliable narrator already, and if you remember in the comics in one of them, Killing Joke, I think he says, I prefer my past to be multiple choice. So we had this sort of very open field of what to do. And to answer that, no, DC or Warner's never said, but you better put Batman in or anything like that. In fact, they probably would have rather us not include it. But we just thought it's a fun thing. This origin story of the Joker also is a tiny little bit of origin story of Batman.
Speaking of that, I think people also want to know, will we see more of this world, this universe that you're creating, in terms of, will this expand out to a kind of alternate DC universe for Batman and the Joker and others?
And I've said this before, but I'll say it quickly. When I first brought the idea to Warner Brothers, it wasn't a Joker movie, because I think big. I went to them with an entire label. I said, we should create a whole nother label called DC Black. I just made it up, but whatever. I said, call it whatever. Where you're doing these kind of low-budget versions of these movies, but you're doing more character study stuff, and you get interesting filmmakers that aren't necessarily tied to the worlds that are already built by other filmmakers. So I said, in the first one we could do Joker, and then we could do Donna, and I named like 3 other things, and 3 other like directors you can get to do that. And they rightfully said, calm down, not starting a label. But that's an interesting idea, why don't you go and write it, and we'll see. So that's what we did, and whether they do it or not, I honestly don't know, and we'll see, but I think it's a cool idea.
The question was about the representation of this Arthur character as having mental illness and struggling. Are you worried that people will get lost in that rather than seeing him as a villain by the end?
Well, I think you said, are we worried that people won't, what was the end of it?
Are you worried that there will be people who see the film and don't see him as a villain by the end of it?
Well, no, I think every movie is sort of, I watch Scarface, so I like him the whole time. But no, with this, it's like, I think it's very clear that you're not there to me. Now, people can interpret movies however they want, and I don't want to say I'd be worried about that, because that's okay to view the movie through that lens. I find it surprising, but no, it's not a worry. I think it's a complicated movie. I think movies and art can be complicated. Sometimes they're meant to be complicated, and I think that's a good thing. There are some people that watch this movie and think none of it happened. And it's an interesting thing too, and I'm not saying this is our theory, but when he's in that white room at the end and she's saying, what's so funny, it's a joke, you wouldn't get it, that he actually imagined the whole movie, and that's not even, Joker. And somebody said that to me, a friend of mine, a filmmaker who I showed it to, and I said, oh, that's interesting too. It's hard to do these because you don't want to define it for people, and you don't want, because there's a lot of ways to interpret the movie, and I hate as the director to define it for people, if that makes sense.
All right, we'll go for just one more. We will go right here. Yes. Question is, when did De Niro join the project?
Oh, that's an easy one. I think about 3 or 4 months before we started shooting. Yeah. No, I said earlier, he really liked the script. I went down to his office and met with him. Well, first I went to his office and said, okay, I need like 10 minutes just to be a fan, because I literally love him. And I said, and I swear to you, if you give me like 10 minutes, then I'll be a grown-up and I'll be a director. And I go for 10 minutes. And cut to an hour later and we're still talking about like Raging Bull or something. And I'm like, okay, thank you. And then we got to the movie. He's amazing, and it was such a thrill to have him. We could do one more. Yeah, he pointed out to me that, he was okay. He read the script, but I was going to say something, but it tends to be that everything you say on this movie gets turned into something, so then I go, just be careful.
Right, and you said you'll take
Sure.
one more? Okay. Right there, I think. Yes, yeah, that's right. Question is about mental illness. She felt that you really humanized mental illness, and what was your research process in exploring that part of the film?
Well, we really carefully don't really put a label on what Arthur has outside of extreme narcissism, which I think you can just tell. So we don't really label what it is. So the research we did, we never wanted to get too specific. And not because we were afraid to get specific, but because even for Joaquin, I didn't want to say, well, he's this and he's that and he's these things. Because Joaquin sort of likes to interpret everything in his own way. So I think it would actually be a negative thing to present to him what it is. But I do think that it's okay that people, through a movie, start discussing that's one of the discussion points. But yeah, with Joaquin, I think we had to just be careful of defining things like that. I jokingly say, there's an old Robert Town quote, and I said it to Joaquin. I said, Joaquin, you are the tunnel at the end of the light. Because anything you bring to him, we just start digging in and digging in. That's a Robert Town quote, I didn't make that up. Anyway, thank you guys, I'm glad you liked it.